I read your interview and look at the conference, which were held in Alatra IPM, and I would like just to read your words, which I found very interesting. That's not the direct cite, but I just format there. So you said that if we all have a new if all we have now would collapse in one day, and we will come back to a primitive way of life where we will have to get the fire and keep our home warm, that wouldn't mean that we didn't have the smartphones in our hands just 2 days ago. So now we suggest that the people who left just lived it 12 years ago, they were just a caveman. So yes, we have the evidences, and we need time to make the whole puzzle together. So that's practically what we do now. Carmen, how could you comment on the events which happened 12,000 years ago? What happened?
1,000 years ago?
12,000 years ago.
Thank you. Well, there was a very dramatic shift, and I think that Atlantis was alive and thriving, that there were at least 3 different world catastrophes, probably 11,600 years ago, 58,000 years ago, 85,000 years ago, and then one even before that. And so I think that the Atlantean civilization was worldwide and existed through these different catastrophes. And so I think that they had such a sophisticated level of technology that they were able to predict that there was going to be this last event during the Younger Dryas geological time. And so it was quite disastrous, and they had colonized the planet. So Atlanteans were a worldwide seafaring culture, and they were able to go and colonize in various places. And I think that part of that, through the research that I've done, involved pyramid building. And so there's something about pyramids, and there's actual evidence that through wherever a pyramid is, going straight through the center of the earth would be something like a volcano. And so the energy of the earth, they were really trying to stabilize the planet through these extremely heavy and stable structures. And they have endured bombs, literally now, earthquakes, floods, all kinds of things. And there's something about the construction of the pyramid. And Valery Yuvarov in Russia brought us this, where there was a narrow inverted pyramid underneath the pyramid. And when there was a lot of force, it brought the stones closer together, which meant that this really was a stabilizing force. And it as huge as it is to think that they did this worldwide, I really do think it was effective in stabilizing the planet. So now we have the evidence that they did this. The Bosnian Pyramid project, I saw with my own eyes the dating of it, because you have to date with carbon-14 natural, something natural, not stone, like a leaf or something. And they did an excavation at the Bosnian pyramids between the 3rd and the 4th course of the stones. And when they were building it, a leaf blew in. And so they were, when they did the excavation, they were able to carbon-14 date the leaf. And I saw with my own eyes, and interestingly, the carbon-14 dating came out of the Ukraine. And it came to 38,000 years ago. 38. And what we know about carbon-14 is it usually makes things look younger, and it's very, very easily contaminated. So what we know through Dr. Sam's Managich is that he was very careful in getting the sample to be pure. So, I mean, that's much older than they even say the Great Pyramid is. So I think it's been badly dated. And that, you know, we look at the last time there was a renovation on the pyramid and think that that's when it was built. But you know as well as I do that the last time you painted your house has nothing to do with when your house was built. And so we tend to look through our own cultural lenses And there's a big thing that makes us think we're 5,000 or 6,000 years old, the Bible, the Quran, school. And what has happened is that our history has been erased from us. And so most people don't even know how to think back that far or to imagine a civilization that was balanced, creative, non-hierarchical, and quite pleasant, where there was no money, that government wasn't like we think of it today, or like it is today. And so imagine that we knew, let's imagine that it was us, that we were there, because I really subscribe to the idea of reincarnation, and I think that many of us that are here now that are interested in these subjects, possibly were born then, we're already alive then, right? And then Emperor Constantine came in 323 AD and made reincarnation legal. So if you believed in reincarnation, they'd kill you. It's like, which is interesting, because if you believed in reincarnation, you'd likely come back. But they didn't want anybody to think they lived more than once, which was part of the whole indoctrination and rhetoric of religion at the time. But let's imagine that we were there and we had an understanding from a scientific perspective that there was going to be a big shift and that it was going to really alter the planet. And, that could happen, again, easily. But was it an asteroid hitting? Was it a change in the temperatures that would have melted the ice caps? But from my research, and it's been multidisciplinary, what we understand about 11,600 years ago was that it was largely an ice age. So one of the only comfortable places that we would have been able to exist was on the equator. Okay, and so Java, in the area that sunk, that it's now sea, there's a lot of geological evidence that shows that what Plato said existed. Now, when we think about Atlantis, we think about the people want it to be Santorini, the high altiplano of South America, Antarctica, various places, and there's probably 15 places on the planet. No, Atlantis was here, it was here, it was here. It was at the Strait of Gibraltar, it was here, it was here. But we have a real propensity to think about one right answer. And that's what school does. A, B, C, D, the teacher has the right answer. They deposit the information into the students give it back on the test for credit, and there's only one place. So where's Atlantis? It's here, it's here, it's here. But Plato said that there were elephants, and there was exotic wood, and there were precious metals and stones and aromatherapy and 3 growing seasons. And he was very specific about a lot of these things. And so we've got a chart of all the different characteristics of what Plato said about Atlantis and all the places it could have been. And something like Troy comes up at 18%, Santorini 23%. But if they say that Atlantis sunk, why would Santorini still be there? If it's there, it didn't sink. And so all of these things, like we've lost our ability to think about what may have happened and what it could have looked like. We've just had that wiped right out of our memory. But north of Java is all the characteristic features that Plato talked about exist there. And so it is close to the equator. So it could have been an ice age everywhere else and a full, thriving, balanced, creative civilization there, with this prediction that something may happen. And I think that that's what I think it's so interesting to us now, because we know something could happen, that the planet is precariously perched, and there's things, that humans and governments have done that make it worse, but it could change in a second. And that's why it's my conviction, through past life memory, through a few different things, that says that we had advanced knowledge that something could happen. And that's why these fleets, these ships went around the world. And perhaps the pyramid building happened, before another crisis. But it seems that we were psychic enough, we were scientifically advanced enough to understand that we could prepare well, and how do you really prepare for a worldwide catastrophe? But if it meant flooding, immense flooding on the planet that was going to destroy most of the environments where humans had existed, that doesn't mean that everyone died. It doesn't, it means that there were a few left. So what would we do if we survived? And little groups of people were in various places on the planet, near pyramids. What would we do? And so I think the first thing that we would do is start marking the stars and the planets and putting markers and seeing the rotation of the Earth. Well, now, if you look at the Earth at night from space, you see lights. And so those lights overrule the stars. But in a civilized culture that wasn't doing things like that, the most natural thing for seafaring and would be observing the stars and the energetic fields around them. So we would start over with that. And so we get the idea that they would have been primitive and that sort of thing. But, you know, things started to rebuild right away. But to me, the disaster happened very quickly and it was worldwide. But when you think about the sea levels changing, what is it, up to hundreds of feet, there's a lot of coastal places that would have gone underwater. So when the big tsunami happened several years ago in India, the water got sucked away, and then people could see that there was actually a city underneath, and then the water came rushing in with the tsunami. And so places like Malta, you see the wagon tracks, and then they end, and then there's the cliff and the water's beyond it. Well, no one's going to build a road that ends on a cliff, right? I mean, so obviously that would have had a landmass that dropped immediately, and Malta is right in the center of the Mediterranean, right? And so the reason I think that it's hard for us to learn from these mistakes or to track what may have happened is that all of the various disciplines don't speak to each other. And so there's something that's happened in the last 5,000 years, which is patriarchal ways of being and thinking, that divides everything. So geology doesn't speak to anthropology, doesn't speak to linguistics, and there's no way that we can piece these little teeny crumbs together unless the disciplines start to speak to one another. And we include the invisible, our memories, our knowing. So I'm willing to say that everybody listening to this, everybody who's inclined to engage in understanding what happened before and what could happen again, has some kind of memory, cellular memory. And so the things that we can't process, the things that we have a curiosity about, but we can't really finish understanding, keeps us alive and asking questions, right? And so I think we already know. I think we have a sense, and that's why getting together and asking these questions is really important. But I also think, on another whole idea, is that it's not necessarily only happening naturally. We have a lot of things with cycles of time and cycles of weather, and that can be all natural. But I think that there's been a lot of interference that's gone on the planet that's combining toxicity in many levels and putting chemicals into the atmosphere that is completely distorting and accelerating the danger. And so I don't think we can look at it only naturally. But the forces that have been doing geoengineering, chemtrails, these sorts of things that have been changing, you know, the climate on the planet, have been, it seems that it's been deliberate. So on the one hand, they're trying to dumb people down and distract them through entertainment, and school is basically propaganda and programming. And so it's disconnected people to the point where they can't really perceive what's going on. And then media repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. And then, so anybody who can still think, you know, about what the truth could be, you know, is kind of isolated, which is why we need to get together and talk about this.
Sorry, before I switch to the next question, may I ask you or Anne just to move the camera so we can see you in the middle of this of the screen? That's great. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's now fine. That's so interesting because you attached so many topics, and I'd like to come back to this natural cause of these disasters. Is it only the evidence of present, only of 12,000 years ago, or maybe we have also evidences which we found 24,000 years ago?
Well, the thing is that 38,000 years ago is the Bosnian pyramid, which is known to be larger than the Great Pyramid. I'm just wondering, I'm trying to remember how many pyramids Dr. Sam talks about. He started, Dr. Sam from Bosnia, he was researching pyramids in South America and all over the world before the Bosnian pyramids were discovered. So by the time they were discovered, he already knew about pyramids that had been covered with soil that then grew trees over the top. So they don't exactly look straight, but if you took a helicopter and were able to trim the trees, you could see that it's really straight-sided underneath. Dr. Sam claims there are 80,000 pyramids on the planet. He says there's 250, I think, in China alone. And there are maps that show where they are. I went looking for them in China, in Xi'an, and I actually found 50 of them through Google Earth. You know, so if you really look and you know they're there, you can identify it. So when we think about pyramids being built and being much, much, much older than they tell us the Great Pyramid is from 2450 BC. That's not very old at all, really, in this game. Okay, so yes, there could have been pyramids 24,000 years ago, much, much older, 39,000 years. But if you think about the alignment with the stars, a precessional cycle is 25,960, something like that, and it's variable, so it's not always the same amount because it's an elliptical kind of situation. But it could be one precession, a precession and a half, two precessions, right? And so if you're really looking at the alignment of the stars, which many of the pyramids and sacred sites like Angkor Wat, they're aligned to the stars. But is it just one precession ago? Or more, or more, or more. So that could bring us to like 52,000 years ago, right? And so it's really difficult for us to differentiate in the cycles of time, especially since everything wants us to think it's 5,000 years. But 5,000 years is the patriarchal time. And I've often said, we're going to come to see the last 5,000 years as the patriarchal hiccup. And the rest of it was all matriarchal and different. But history's when the soldiers came. And they say there's always been war. I don't think that for one second that there's always been war. I think we had some very peaceable times. And that's the value of looking at these cycles and understanding what was here before. And I think I've said it before too, that the agenda of the patriarchy is to erase evidence of everything other than itself. So that's all that exists. That's all we're allowed to think about. And it's just not enough to understand our past.
Yeah, I see it's also this way. What's interesting is, did the ancestors knew about all these cycles? So I see, but did they left also evidences for new generations about these cycles, about the precession, about 12,000 years cycle? Because when I think today, from my point of view, during my lifetime, 12,000 years ago, this is such a huge period of time. But there are also cycles like spring and winter and so on during the year. So we have also these cycles, ice ages. So the ancestors knew about it.
Well, and equinoxes and solstices are when the sun is, you know, the shortest day, the longest day, and the equal day. And anytime you see a stone circle or alignments, pretty much every single time you'll see it aligned to the seasons. Stonehenge, all these different places now apply it. And so there's the small cycle of time, there's a larger cycle of time. In Egypt, there were 5 cycles in a day, in a year, and in the larger cycle. And so all of it was measured out and understood to be much longer. And when we say that, in the ceiling of the Temple of Dendera, there's the linear zodiac, and then there's what's known as the round zodiac. But Svetlana Pavlova, also from Russia, she understood it to be the calendar of catastrophes. And so the disaster that happened 11,600 years was marked right in the ceiling of the temple. And then the linear zodiac is showing where there was an interruption in the cycles of time. So there's an Atlantean proverb that says, when the head of the crab hits the heart of the lion, which is speaking about Cancer and Leo in terms of the large band. So a precessional cycle has 2,000 years for each sign of the zodiac. And that's a band that goes all the way around, and our cycles are working within that. But somehow 2 of the signs could have applied. Well, how does that work? And so it seems that there was some kind of an impact on the planet, asteroid, we don't know necessarily, that would have shifted the axis of the planet. So it used to be straight, and now it's 23 degrees. But what that did, it changed the orbit of the Earth to the point where we used to have 360 days in a year. Now we have 365. So the Egyptians had a different calendar. They had 3 weeks of 10 days, right? And 360 days. And so then they just added 5 days for the holidays. They said a day for Osiris, a day for Isis, a day for Horus, Nephthys, goes like that and Seth. And so what the Temple of Kamumbo has the old calendar, and then the Temple of Dendera, the Temple of Hathor, has the whole story of precession. And I've been studying it for a number of years, and years ago it was covered in dark, like looking into a cup of black coffee. And the Christians came, and they used the temples as a barn. So they had all the animals in there, and they built mud brick houses all the way around Egyptian temples. You'll see mud brick, except for the Temple of Isis that was moved because it was drowned during the flooding of the Aswan Dam. And then when they instead of shoveling out the garbage, the bad stuff, they just would burn it. And the soot made this incredible ceiling of all these different colors with so much knowledge, so dark, 40 feet up that you couldn't see it. And so over the last number of years, they've cleaned it, but no one's really interpreted it. And I've just posted detailed pictures. I did a professional photo shoot in there so you could see with high resolution film what is there. And now I've interpreted it to speak to this disaster, when we had it, what it meant, and to explain to humanity what it was like before and what we had to go through. Well, no one's talking about that except Svetlana Pavlova. And so instead of saying the zodiac, it's a zodiac. Okay, it's a zodiac. You can see both on the linear zodiac and the circular one, you can see Sagittarius and Scorpio and the various, all of the different signs, and they're clearly represented. But what isn't known is that the interruption is precise. They can get it right down to the day, month, whatever, but right down to when this disaster happened. And so the astrologers, astronomers, the scientists who work together were able to tell the story and leave it for us. And then it gets covered in soot because of bad management, and then it's revealed at the point where almost nobody understands how to interpret it. But it's sitting there in Egypt.
What I have also asked myself is just a logical question. If all these civilizations, Atlantis and Egypt and South America and so on, if they had such technologies, if they had such a knowledge and science, why didn't they keep them? Why didn't they survive in the same state and couldn't see these events come? I just don't understand. Yeah, why?
Well, let's look at the similarities between these cultures. Because if you look, and Anna and I just went, and her husband Ezekiel went to a museum, a private collection museum in Malaga a few weeks ago, and they had Babylonian, Greek, Sabian, Mesopotamian, Egypt, and they had like a showcase on each one. And they interviewed me to look at the similarities in these different cultures. But what's true is perhaps these different cultures don't look like they spoke to each other, right? Because they're all separate. And East Indian, Chinese, they all are part of this. So there's like 6, 7, 8 of these cultures. They all have commerce, weights and measures, astronomy, geometry, mathematics, right? All these different sciences that, and it's the same. So maybe they have different.
Spirituality as well.
Pardon me?
Spirituality as well.
Oh, and the spirituality, absolutely, no question. But it may look like it's got a bit of a different flavor, but there's more the same than there is different. Okay, so if on this planet they're not talking to each other, or it looks like it, I subscribe to the idea of a third-party hypothesis. Let's say they all had the same ancestors. And for simple terms, we say it's a divine team. I mean, Lemurian, it could be other things, but their ancestors were unified. And when I say they had a disbursement, when they knew that there was going to be a disaster, they sent different groups in different places who had the civilizing culture, who have a different style. Like ballerinas have a different style than firemen. And so, you know, they have different music, but really it's the same. And if you look at the unified fields all in the South Pacific, they all have red, white, and black. They all have spirals. They all wear feathers. And so if you look at these different things, it looks initially like it's a different style and they have their own culture. But really, it's an interpretation of the same, right? And so, you know, why don't we have this culture now? Well, I'm going to say it's patriarchy. Instead of everything being together, and matriarchy is balance. It's not the women over the men. It's everything is together. And this is what the ancient Egyptians, you see it over and over and over and over. Balance, balance, balance. Balance between the masculine and the feminine. Understanding of how a woman has masculine traits inside, a man has feminine traits inside. And patriarchy is about divide, divide, divide. And power over instead of empowerment. So this whole thrust of, you know, close your eyes, close your ears, don't see what's really going on, and look over here, like all distraction has deteriorated our culture to the point. And the other thing they do is they want to say men against women, blacks against whites, this race against that, you know, divide, divide, divide. Give guns to both sides, create a conflict, leave, and let them kill each other, right? And so it's destructive. It's not constructive. So even education, instead of being constructivism, which is building on what you know and meaning-centered. So each person is an individual, and they seek what their interests are, and they make something. They make a project, they make something, they create something. But now education is deconstructed. You critique Shakespeare, you break things apart, you divide math, English, and nobody can have the poetry of cooking, you know, where things are blended, and it's very, very unnatural. So when you say, why did these cultures not survive? The simplest answer is patriarchal ways of being and thinking. And it's worked. So now we're all stuck in these 5,000 years of our brains being compartmentalized, of distraction, of commercialism, so a few people can make money, and we're all berserk. We don't know what's going on because we're disconnected. We're disconnected from nature. We're disconnected from the stars because of the lights. We're in vehicles that don't connect to the earth. We're wearing shoes that don't connect to the earth. And the unfortunate part is that it's worked for most people.
Carmen, you just see my questions come, because the matriarchy matriarchy is would be my next question, because we are also studying this culture or as a matriarchat, and it's very interesting. What the spiritual values, what cultural values did they have, and how has it happened that these cultures switched to a patriarchy? What happened?
Very good question. Now, I
In
have
your
a big
opinion?
answer. I have a big answer to that. Okay. I founded and was director of the Women's Therapy and Research Center in Calgary, Canada for 10 years. And I was hosting sociology students, psychology students to do their practicum. And there was a research program for research assistants at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. And they wanted to send me 2 research assistants for 9 months, and I was to direct their research. And so they said to me, come up with a really good research question, because they're going to have a long time to go deep into the subject. And you will direct them, and they will come back with papers, research findings, studies, that sort of thing. So I embarked upon, if there was one question that I had, what is it? And that's the question. What happened from matriarchal culture that gave way to patriarchy? How did we end up in such a mess because everything's disconnected? And so off they went. And the interesting thing about this is that they found articles. You know, when you look at a bibliography, a reference at the end of an article, and there were all these different journals from feminist journals. So they went into the libraries, of which there were many, university libraries, looking for these journals, and they couldn't find them. So then my task was to find where these journals were. If they were publications, where are the journals? So as it turned out, in Montreal, where I was born, at Concordia University, there was the Simone de Beauvoir Institute Library. And Simone de Beauvoir wrote in sex, meaning women, way back, right? And it turned out that my mentor, who was the head of counseling at Concordia University, Priscilla Krause, said, come to Montreal. So I took my son, I put him in riding camp and horseback riding, and I had a month to go and look in this library. Now, this library wasn't very big, but it was floor to ceiling, and it was all feminist journals. So these research assistants had told me, you know, what the articles were. And I went and I ended up photocopying like about this many papers and finding these articles. And these women in the library were like, what are you doing? Because I had so much material finally. And it took me 10 years, actually, at the end of all that, to go through it all and to understand. Now, I had also traveled as a young person to 23 different countries, looking. And one of my most profound experiences was in Knossos in Greece. And my mother met me when we were traveling, and her sister. And we went and we were in the museum, and there was a pin that was like a safety pin. And it was the time when they had gone from fabric, and then we used to tie knots, but they were able to have different clothes because of this pin. And I looked into this case, and I was just tumbling through thinking, someone from 3,000 years ago wore that. And then something overcame me. But when I was reading on the sign, it said the Palace of King Minos, and something inside me just said, no. King, you know, and I just felt so upset with that idea that it wasn't a king. Anyway, something brought me up to this area where you could see the civilization of Knossos. And it was just this empty field. But something was happening to me. And I thought, I don't know what's going on here, but I know what's important. So I made myself a promise that I would take what I call an energetic imprint. I took just noticing everything about what I'm feeling. And I made a promise to myself that I would keep looking until I found the answer to why I felt what I felt there. So in this big pile of papers, I actually went across the street from the library and I was having coffee and I found a map. This is 10 years after the experience of Knossos. And I looked at it, that's where I was standing. And you know what it was? It was the sacred grove where the priestesses would do their rituals. And I understood they would do them naked. They would do them just with the women. And it was all nature oriented. And that's where I was standing. And the Christians came and they chopped all the trees down. So those kinds of experiences go a long way. So then I was like, okay, so what happened in the switchover? So if you can imagine Amazon priestesses, in my book, there's a chapter on Medusa and how the women were strong and, you know, they would get together with the men just to get pregnant. And then if they had a male baby, they'd give it back to the men and they'd raise the females. And it was all because it was splitting off. Okay, so think about this. When famine was ever imminent, and it was hunter-gatherers, okay, they're going around, and so they decided to take a plant and put it near the mouth of the cave, horticulture. And then they started to plant more than one, agriculture. And then there was enough grain to store. So during the hunter-gatherer times, women would get pregnant once every 5 years or so because they didn't have enough food, and that's when the big women were considered to be the most sacred because they had enough flesh to procreate. Once they had agriculture, women started to be able to procreate every year, get pregnant every year. And then the men said, oh, we have something to do with this because before it was all procreation envy. And then Freud came along and said it's penis envy. Women are jealous of men and so they have penis envy. But women don't have penis envy. They don't want outdoor plumbing, I say. So once the men understood that they had something to do with creating babies, because the cycle, women give, they give into the birth, they give birth, and the men have nothing to do with it, or it seems. Once they understood they had something to do with it, they started to take over. And in all the rituals, they used menstrual blood, the highest form of DNA. And women, when they were bleeding together, they would get together, like in Malta, in the hypogeum. They had these circular chambers, and this is in lots of different places, Easter Island, okay? And the women would literally put their heads together and have a collective dream. They would lie with their head.
Are you there? Because I lost your picture.
Bad connection.
So we are waiting till the Anne and Dr. Bolter come back.
А переведи из последнего немножко вот про женщин. Она рассказывала, что...
Она говорит, что это все связано вообще с тем, что мужчины, говорит, начали это самое понимать, что они связаны
Я понял.
Про менструацию стала рассказывать, короче, про то, что это все связано, короче, там, ну, при этих... Будем просить.
Because I do want to finish what I was saying. Okay, so the women would be sharing their dream time and collecting their menstrual blood, which is the highest form of DNA. And then they would use this menstrual blood on the fields to help fertilize and then to grow plants. Okay. Once this situation that men said, oh, you know, we have something to do with procreation, so never mind about the women, they started using the same rituals, red, white, and black, white being virgin, red being mother, black being crone. And even in this museum that we went to a few weeks ago, they had the triple goddess, the three phases of the feminine. Well, men don't go through that, right? I mean, when you're a mother, you're a mother. If you're not a mother, you're a virgin. And if you're older and don't menstruate anymore, you're a crone, virgin, mother, crone, red, white, and black, which you see over and over and over in anything that has to do with Atlantis. and the spiral energy of going through the phases and birthing. So then the men started to wear, priests and whatnot, red, white, and black, a dress, a skirt, the hat that they used to kind of looks like the hats from Egypt. But they started doing sacrifices. They'd split the throat of a sacrificial lamb, and they would take blood from death, which is not the same thing as blood from life. And that's what the patriarchy is based on. So you kill, blood, bloodletting. But blood from death isn't the same thing as blood from life. Period. Not the same. Okay? So I think that's fundamentally at the root. And the other thing is the sacred feminine. Well, they were saying, okay, now we don't need the woman. So in Greek mythology, Zeus had a headache and somebody hit him with an axe and out came Athena. And the feminine now becomes the goddess of war. Aphrodite, somebody's ejaculating into an ocean, the froth of an ocean, and she's born in a shell. So once they started thinking in patriarchal ways, they didn't even need a womb anymore. The men effectively were giving birth without a womb. So then the Bible comes and we don't need the feminine, and Mary Magdalene's a prostitute. Well, they had sacred prostitutes in Babylon, right? Where the men would come from war, because there was still these the passageway in between. They'd be full of pain and angst from killing, and they would make love to a sacred prostitute who would process the energy, and then the men would go home to their wives. But that was sacred. Well, then Mary Magdalene's a prostitute. And you don't need, and Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Well, it used to be Virgin Mother Crone. You don't need the feminine anymore. It's all the boys, right? And so all of this became indoctrinated, that the feminine is a second sex, like Simone de Beauvoir. The women do the menial work, the men are important, right? The masculine principles of the left brain, math, what's concrete. If you can't see it, it's not there. The other side of the brain that's more feminine dominant is symbolism, dream time, all the things, face recognition in a child, the things that you can't see, the creative, the psychic. So patriarchy were like, we don't need anything psychic. We don't need anything you can't see. Everything is concrete. Everything's about money. If you can't see it, it's not there. And instead of consciousness being the highest value, consciousness being the blend between the masculine and the feminine and awareness, profit became the highest value. It doesn't matter who you kill, money, me, mine. I'm the one, even if there's a bloodbath and all these people are dead, I win. And that's the problem. That's what the trouble we're in right now. And people can't even think straight anymore. So there's the answer to that question.
That's an interesting point, because I also read the books by Maria Gimbutas, and she also looks that actually in this matriarchal cultures there are no evidences of war or violence or any conflicts. But we also see from the messages from the Bible, maybe from myths, that these catastrophic events are somehow connected to the spiritual degradation of the society. Can you comment on it? Is there connection? And maybe also is that there are any prophecies about the modern time, about our time on this topic?
Well, okay, first of all, older is deeper in archaeology. And so when archaeology started in 1910, and that was like Freud starting with psychology, Darwin. I think they were all with Champollion, the one who deciphered hieroglyphic poorly. They're all smoking cigars together in the same speakeasies in London, right? And at the beginning of archaeology, they were just doing the surface, right? And in order to really find the matriarchal things 30,000 years ago, the cave paintings, what Maria Gimbutas was doing, it's much deeper, okay? And so it took years before, because at first you just understand, you're seeing evidence of the war and and the arrowheads and the spears and that sort of thing. But the real matriarchal times, there was no evidence of war. And I pointed that out in the interview that I did at that museum. It was very significant to see all that. And I said, look, you don't see any what I call boy things, right? The women are sitting on the thrones. The baby is sitting on the lap, Horus sitting on the lap of Isis. You see no arrowheads. You see no spears. It's vessels with breasts that are like something you would put water in. Matriarchal, connection to spirit, connection to animals, animal medicine, all that. Okay? And so most of what we find is not patriarchal at all. So even there's finds in Turkey with thousands and thousands and thousands of things. And my book is called Angels and Archetypes, an Evolutionary Map of Feminine Consciousness. So the evidence is there from bread making, beer making, the kinds of things where periodicity and fermentation. And the matriarchal cultures are there, but they tried to destroy it all. But they didn't destroy the things that would help them make beer or bread. Okay, and so the artifacts that they're finding is goddesses. It's all feminine, all of it. So the 5,000 years of patriarchy compared to what, 100,000 at least years, more millions if you really look at anthropology. But they tell us we're 5,000 years old, and everybody believes it. So what we're looking at is through the lenses, the patriarchal lenses. That's it. Okay, so that's why we can't see it. Now, is there prophecy? There's lots of prophecy, but the thing is, if you narrow things down, you can't see different time frames. You can't see outside those lines. And so this patriarchal imperative hierarchy, one person on top, everybody else below, don't care who you kill, bloodbaths, it's such a horrible destructive. It's not constructive. It's destructive. But it's destroyed most people's ability to think. People are toxic from toxic food, toxic air, right? Even toxic school. The school tells you what to think. They don't teach you how to think. They teach you what to think. So all of this, the tragedy for me, is that this worked so well. There's very few people who even think outside the box, who think about a saner time. And the more we move, and it's getting worse and worse. You know, over the last 10 years, it seems that people have less ability to concentrate, less interest in reading, less ability, you know, they're on their phones. And so I thought it was bad 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, but now people just go from one distraction to another. So they can't possibly think of a longer story that has to do with balance or creativity. Well, what do you have to care about Atlantis for? And the other thing is that Atlantis is the subject that more books, screenplays, cartoons have been made of than anything else, because it appeals to people. They're very interested, you know, on some level about what it's about, but you can project onto it. So they project Transformers and destruction and, you know, that sort of thing. That's not what it was about. But now the story of a peaceable, creative culture isn't anything anybody wants to think about. You know, you look at the news, it's all bad news. And they say people want the bad news. No, they don't. They're just used to it, and that's all they give you. So we're in trouble because they've got people consuming, wanting, buying. And the thing is it's the act of wanting that they've got us hooked on. Because once you get what you want something else. And it's worked. That's the tragedy for me, is that it's worked.
Dr. Bolger, but you know, when I think about also our time, about the massive, the information, there is such a phrase that if you want to know what kind of society you will have tomorrow, look which information it consumes today. So we see, in fact, that the information flood, and it's really negative. But when I think on myself, just a small part, then I look, actually, I can decide what I consume and what not. And if we are 7 billion people on Earth say we don't want to consume it, then we define what kind of information we want to see. How do you think today in the science, is it possible to unite, or how do you think what is needed to unite people also in the science?
Well, first of all, disciplines need to speak to each other. Cultural anthropology won't even speak to social anthropology. You don't get scientists getting together and comparing notes because everything's in its own little box. Now, what you're doing with Elantra seems to be a worldwide unification. And that's the only reason I'm sitting here, because I'm really working to not do so many interviews and that sort of thing, and to eventually retire. But it's very compelling what you're doing. And it's all about connection. And patriarchy is all about disconnection. Okay? Now, the big structure and the establishment of society is going to stay patriarchal. I don't know where you break that through. But individuals are saying, no, I don't want that food. No, if it's in a box, I'm not going to eat it. I say, if you can't spell it, don't eat it. Right? Because it's full of chemicals that can stay on a shelf that somebody can make a profit for. So there's many people that are seeing through that. But what do you do about chemtrails? And they keep everybody looking down. Nobody looks up at the sky. You're not going to see straight lines going across, that you can't say that's natural. And then people are breathing the toxicity. And everybody's, if you look around, it used to be that occasionally somebody got cancer in an occasional family. Now 2 or 3 people in a family have cancer. And so they're so happy with it because they can make so much money. But we're in trouble because most people aren't thinking and they're not asking the questions. And I don't know where the solution is, because even if we get together worldwide and we're aware of these things, how do you stop the chemtrails? How do you stop it? Like, perhaps I listen too much to, to all the different political things and who's lying about what. But, they invent new words every year in the dictionary. And for a lot of times it was a mouse and a hard drive and things for the computer. But the latest one I heard about, the word of the year, post-truth. 2 T's, one word. That if you don't get caught, it's not wrong. Truth is an option in our culture. And there's a congressman that said, and this is a quote, "We know we will have succeeded if everything the American public thinks is false. We need vaccines. If you go to the doctor has that they have made a practice that truth doesn't count." Well, if you've got a world that thinks that truth doesn't count, we're in trouble. Okay, so bringing it together, talking about the truth, having good news, thinking about health, okay, it's a good start. But the overarching society run by old men or women acting like patriarchs, because there's women in government, but they act all like the men. It's not feminine consciousness, it's women acting like men, right? If you will. And so how you break that through, I don't know, but I find it quite discouraging.
Today is also an interesting time because there is a lot of talks about the climate change, and now in Germany we also see a lot of demonstrations. Everyone is caring about the climate, about our Earth. But what we see now, there are 100,000 people, climate refugees, who are suffering from these events already now, not in the future, but now. Dr. Bota, how do you think? Can we come through these events like 12,000 years ago today, and what is needed for?
Well, that's why I sometimes think it's too late. I mean, we can't fall down and think it's too late. But if you listen to Dane Wigington, who I mentioned last time, you know, even if we stopped all the destruction and the imbalance, there's no natural weather on the planet anymore. It's all engineered. They're making a drought, they're making it hot, they're making it cold. They call it global warming, and it's freezing everywhere. Like, this is a real problem. So just by realizing that it's wrong, it's almost like the mechanism and the machine is much bigger than us. And Dane Wigington will say, it may be too late. We can't stop trying for the children, but there's lots of people, millennials, that don't want to have children. You know, like, I think that they keep on distracting us and giving us new movies to watch and that sort of thing, hoping that we'll stay asleep. If we stopped everything now, that's the problem, which is not exactly possible. I think the Earth can recover, but some people say it's already too late. Like, how do you fix it if a region has been in drought? It's possible if we all work together and we use a new technology, but we're still not off oil and gas. It's not good for the planet. They're doing fracking and all kinds of things. But, you know, there's 6,000 patents sitting in the US Patent Office for free energy, and they suppress it. And, you know, there's how many agent provocateurs that just troll around the internet, and if you're saying something interesting, they cut your connection. Then we just see that. That's real. It sounds like you're a little bit paranoid if you think that way. But, and anybody who understands a cure for cancer, they'll kidnap them, and you know what I mean? Like, it sounds paranoid, but what do you see on television? Espionage, FBI, CIA, killing, if you know something, gotta get rid of you. So either you're living in some kind of ignorance is bliss, or you're becoming increasingly concerned. Like, I don't like to be in an interview saying maybe it's too late. We have to hope it isn't. But there's not that many awake people. You know, they talked about ascension before, and the archangels and the extraterrestrials, and, you know, we're going to be a split in the planet, and the people who were ready would go, and then all this other stuff to dumb people down, 911, false flag events, fear, terrorism, guns. Well, how does a little flower bloom when you've got the big steel-toed boots coming to destroy it? You know, like, I mean, what's your opinion of that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to stop doing interviews because I don't want to sound like this. And I don't want to be pessimistic. But it's a problem. We've got a problem. And, you know, a bodhisattva takes a vow that as long as one person is suffering, they're not free. And I think that if you've taken a bodhisattva vow in another life, you live that way now, right? But there's not that many people. And I suppose if you get them all and put them together, that's a good idea. But we're not talking to the government. So what do you do? What do you think?
Well, you see, even, you know, in the nature that one flower can come through this road, you know, through road, and you see that it has this power. And when we are together, because you mentioned it so much and a lot of times today, and I think it's a key point, because despite we have now everything, actually also the technologies, everything is now here. The question is how we use it. We also see that this natural disaster, that people can unite. And in Alatra International Public Movement, we also collect the stories and see examples how people say, hey, we came through these events, and there is a solution when we are together. And we can do such a lot of things together. And now this project, also actually this interview, is now an example how people can unite and start. Of course, it takes some time, but as you mentioned, first is the information. We have to look what we have and the truth. So what is the reason what is happening now? And even if we look at the anthropogenic factor, this is only because of our consumer society, of our consumer way of thinking. Just take, as you also mentioned, and all the wars. So, but I think we are 7 billion people on Earth, and everyone has his contribution to this point. And I think that starts with initiative, not to be quiet, but to start in a constructive way. So I'm sure that this is a good beginning, and I hope that this interview is not the last one, and you will be present on our game, if not in the 13th April. I guess guys said that you cannot be present there on 13 April.
I have friends coming in, and I'm leading a tour.
But this is only the first game.
Pardon?
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that when you were talking, I was thinking that in the revolution in Egypt, the Arab Spring, the soldiers realized that they're actually brothers of the people that were on the other side. So they went away, took their uniforms off, and came back as the people. That happened in Czechoslovakia. In the Velvet Revolution, that was nonviolent. That the soldiers said, you know what? I'm not fighting them because I'm one of them.
Also, in the First World War, there is a story of between the French, German, and British army, that they had just this Christmas time. They didn't fight; just they refused it, and the commanders couldn't do it with it. Just couldn't do anything because people refuse.
Right.
They just refuse. They just don't do it.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the way it'll change. When the people working for the government say, forget it, I'm not doing this anymore. So that's the challenge. I mean, and you know, we could have a beautiful world. We should have a beautiful world. Well, we do have a beautiful world. But there are things that make people suffer.
But which goal?
Hunger on them. Pardon?
Sorry, which goal, which big goal could unite us, all of us, everyone, despite the religion or any views, but could unite us in the face of these coming cataclysms?
Well, the truth, even during 9/11, you know, the people helped each other. Hurricane Katrina, the people were helping each other. There wasn't a lot of looting and destruction. So the truth is that real people care about each other and share. You know, if you've got a loaf of bread, what's the point of eating it all? You give as much as of the people around. And I think that's who we are. And this other movement that seems to have colored everything isn't really how real people operate. Even the people who are starving in Africa, you know, they're united, they're together. So I think that's the thing. Heart, living from the heart. Now, the Egyptians, when someone passed, they didn't have a word for death. They sucked the brain, they pulled the brain up out of the nose and threw it away, because they thought the seat of intelligence was the heart, not the brain. Okay? And looking at how the ancients lived is the answer. I mean, everything you see on the temple walls and in the pyramids, which is a different time frame, is about humanity being united and everything being for the planet, not different colors of different countries. So uniting in the heart, that's the biggest goal.
You see, even the sun came out during your talking, because these are really nice words, and we are in fact a big human family, and this is what differs us from animals, and because we have a higher sense, we have this feeling and the spiritual nature where we are one. So, and that gives a hope, and this is a good start, not only to talk, but just like now, I see you for the first time, like in live, not in the screen. I mean, in any program, but talking to you, and it's a great opportunity to make friends, to talk to people, just to learn how they think, what they, yeah, I mean, and to see that actually we have so much in common, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
But I want to say something about animals. We have reflective consciousness. Perhaps an animal doesn't think I was happy yesterday when you came home, but they are living in their heart. And when you see animals helping each other, or even the instincts when the tsunami was coming, the elephants were already gone, right? So animals maybe are a way we can learn how to be more human, because you can tell if they're hurt. They're really loving, and even things like horse medicine, where you get animals, that are helping autistic children. So perhaps we learn lessons from animals too.
Well, learning is always a good point. It's a very good point to learn from each other, from everything. So that's why we also here to learn more. And even me, not a scientist, I can learn so much from you and from other people, to learn more about our world, where we're living now, and about myself. So this is a great opportunity, and I hope that Anne also talked to a great event on 11th of May. I hope. Society Last Chance. Do you know about it already?
Yeah, she told me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I hope that.
But we have as well here in Alicante.
But I'm thinking too about traveling, and difference between a tourist, like if you go and live amongst the people wherever in the world, you will see everyone in the world wants the same thing: love and respect. And we want to give love and respect. So, and you've said it, there's more of us than there are of them. But the more you travel and the more you do sessions like this, like we don't know each other, but you can feel that we share similar values that are happy and pure values for humanity. So, I mean, we've got to try. We can't give up.
What would you wish us? Just, a happy end to all of us, to ALLATRA International Public Movement, to all of volunteers who make this initiative, not as a professionals, but to people of goodwill, who wants to unite all of us on earth. What would you wish to us?
That we see through, and we can feel, we connect to our discernment, and we know when something's not right. And we say no. Even if we can't do anything about it, we know in ourselves. And in the Pyramid Code, Hakim, the indigenous wisdom keeper, says, knowing is a very deep power.
Amen. Let's be so. Thank you, Carmen, very, very much. I hope to see you on 11th of May. And because we gather here in Berlin, and this is a great event, and this feeling, being together in this one day with the whole planet, that will be really amazing, I'm sure. So thank you so much. I wish you a nice stay in Spain and by Anne, and wish you all of us good day. Thank you for the interview, and see you next time. Have a good day, guys. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.